Hashtag airplane. The confrontation at the airport. The air in the arrivals hall of Terminal B hung thick with the usual blend of jet fuel, frantic travel anxiety, and the strangely comforting scent of fast food coffee. I stood near the designated military family meeting point, clutching the strap of my worn backpack, a civilian landmark in a sea of functional efficiency. My heart hammered a nervous rhythm against my ribs, partially from the excitement of seeing her, and mostly from the dread of the anticipated confrontation. It had been 18 months since I last saw Amelia. 18 months during which she had completed her initial training, been deployed, and returned with a new identity, one meticulously sculpted by the rigid standards of the U.S. Navy. The transformation was evident before I even caught sight of her face. Then I saw her. She emerged from the secure gate area, a beacon of crisp, starched professionalism. The Navy working uniform, NWU, with its distinctive blue and gray digital camouflage, made her look taller, broader, and utterly unfamiliar. The perfectly squared cover hat sat low, shadowing the chiseled severity of her expression. A duffel bag, heavy with the weight of her service, rested easily on her shoulder. Around her, a small contingent of other service members, also in uniform, moved with the same disciplined stride. Families rushed forward, shouts of joy echoing as mothers hugged sons, and young children leaped into the arms of fathers. It was a tableau of homecoming, raw emotion clashing momentarily with military stoicism. I raised my hand, offering a tentative smile, the kind you give when you aren't sure if the person you're greeting is still the person you knew. "Amelia," I called out, my voice thin against the ambient noise. She spotted me instantly. Her gaze, however, was not one of familial warmth or relief. It was a cold, calculating assessment. Her stride didn't soften. She didn't quicken her pace. She simply reached the invisible boundary separating her world from mine and stopped. The smile froze on my face. She took a slow, deliberate breath, ensuring the silence between us stretched long enough to draw the attention of the two enlisted men standing nearby, waiting for their own rides. She didn't hug me. She didn't even acknowledge the 6-hour drive I'd made to pick her up. Instead, she let the heavy duffel bag slide from her shoulder to the polished floor with a resounding thud. Her voice, now deeper and projected with the practiced authority of a command deck, cut through the welcoming chaos like a surgeon's scalpel. It wasn't a private address. It was a public declaration intended for everyone within a 10-foot radius to hear. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her eyes raking over my comfortable, travel-worn clothes, my faded jeans, my slightly oversized hoodie. She managed to convey a lifetime of disappointment in a single, perfectly formed question. I blinked, momentarily speechless. I came to get you. Mom sent me, like we planned." Amelia's lips curled into a barely perceptible sneer, an expression of utter disdain that contradicted the ideals of honor and service stitched into her uniform. She gestured dismissively toward the crowds of happy, embracing families around us. Her eyes flickered to the polished brass insignia on her collar, then back to my face. "Look around, Chris," she said, using my full name with chilling formality. "This is an airport. This is where people with responsibilities come and go. People with purpose. People who are part of something bigger." She paused, letting the full weight of her statement drop before delivering the final, devastating blow. Her voice dropped slightly, becoming lower, more intense, and dangerously clear. It was the moment the whole scene shifted from a private dispute to a public spectacle. The air seemed to compress. The two enlisted men nearby stiffened, their peripheral vision now fixed on our confrontation. She leaned in just enough for the words to be laced with pure venom, ensuring that no one could mistake the intent behind her meticulously chosen attire and demeanor. "You don't belong here." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisoned. It wasn't just about the location. It was about my entire worth, my entire life choice, judged and dismissed by my own sister, who was now using the sanctity of her military service as a weapon to sever our familial tie in the most humiliatingly public way possible. I felt the sudden, burning heat of shame climb up my neck. My eyes darted around, confirming my fear. The conversation was no longer private. Everyone turned. Hashtag angryface, the escalation and the initial reaction. The silence that followed Amelia's brutal declaration, asterisk, you don't belong here, asterisk, was more damning than any shouting match. It was a vacuum created by shock, where the ambient sounds of rolling suitcases and gate announcements seemed to dissolve, leaving only the ringing echo of her cruelty. My cheeks were burning. The heat was not just embarrassment. It was the slow burn of betrayal igniting into fury. This wasn't the sister who had cried on my shoulder when she first signed up. This was a polished, weaponized stranger who saw me only as a flaw in her perfect military narrative. I straightened up, forcing my spine rigid against the desire to shrink away. I looked her dead in the eye, refusing to break contact, even as I registered the widening stares of the two sailors beside her and the slow, cautious turn of a dozen civilian heads. "Oh, I don't belong here?" I retorted, my voice shaking slightly, but holding firm. "Tell me, Amelia, where do I belong? Because last I checked, I was the one who drove 600 miles, in a car I barely keep running, to pull the 6 to 7 shift at the call center so I could scrape together half the money for your emergency flight home." I took a step closer, matching her intensity. "Do I belong in my apartment, staring at the eviction notice, while you're here, judging the civilian life you temporarily left behind? No, I belong right here, Amelia, because I am the one connected to you by blood, not by a chain of command. I am the only reason you aren't paying a $50 taxi fare right now." The financial context, the ugly reality of our shared working-class struggle, was the one thing that seemed to momentarily crack her military veneer. Her jaw tightened, a muscle twitching visibly beneath her ear. The facts were inconvenient. They contaminated the sanitized image of independence she was trying to project. "Don't you dare bring that up," she hissed, lowering her voice marginally, but still failing to make it private. "That's civilian weakness. That's your problem, not mine. I solved my problems by earning my place. You solve yours by looking like that." She gestured vaguely at my clothing again, her eyes conveying the implied message. Asterisk, you look poor. You look lazy. You look like failure. Asterisk, the uniform had apparently given her license to jettison all vestiges of familial loyalty and basic human kindness. She was using the authority of her service to imply that my lack of a uniform made me inherently lesser. Hashtag, the collective silence and the glare. By now, the confrontation had achieved full spectacle status. The two sailors who had been waiting nearby were no longer discreetly looking away. They had subtly shifted their stance, their faces impassive but their attention glued to the scene. It wasn't just them. A large, extended family, grandparents, parents, and several small children, who had just embraced their own returning airmen, were now frozen in place, their expressions a mix of confusion and sharp disapproval. The gaze of the public was the most unnerving element. It was a collective, silent judgment settling upon her, not me. Initially, I had expected the public to side with the service member. After all, she was the one in uniform, the symbol of sacrifice and honor. I was just the messy civilian. But the naked contempt in Amelia's voice, the utter lack of grace or gratitude she displayed towards someone who had helped her, created an immediate, visceral reversal of sympathies. An older gentleman, impeccably dressed, likely a business traveler, stood about 15 feet away. He had been on his phone, but now held it suspended by his side. His eyes, dark and piercing, were fixed on Amelia. There was a look of deep offense on his face, the kind of offense reserved for seeing a principle violated, a code desecrated. He wasn't looking at me with pity. He was looking at her with the hard, unwavering disappointment of someone who knew what real service was, and this wasn't it. The most telling reaction came from a middle-aged woman, her face streaked with tears from having just said goodbye to her own military child. She didn't speak, but she slowly shook her head, a minute, heartbreaking movement that spoke volumes. It was as if Amelia's cruelty had retroactively tainted the beauty of her own recent farewell. Amelia seemed oblivious to the shift. Empowered by the camouflage she wore, she only saw me, her target. "Just grab my bags and let's go," she ordered. retrieving her duffel bag and thrusting it toward me. And try not to look so unkempt on the drive home. You're embarrassing me. But the world had already turned. Everyone saw. The stage was set, not for my defeat, but for the beginning of her public downfall. ## speaking head the public intervention. Amelia's final, dismissive command. Just grab my bags and let's go. You're embarrassing me, was the line in the sand. It was the moment the tension, thick enough to cut with a knife, finally snapped. She had misjudged the crowd entirely, assuming the uniform granted her immunity from civilian judgment. She was wrong. I stood there, refusing to move, refusing to take the heavy duffel bag she offered. The silent war between us was now the most compelling drama in the arrivals hall. Then, a voice broke the silence. It wasn't mine. It was deep, gravelly, and carried the unmistakable timbre of age and experience. That's enough, Ensign. The sound was commanding, cutting through the background hum with immediate authority. Amelia, startled, whipped her head around. The voice belonged to the older gentleman who had been on the phone moments earlier. He was now standing fully upright, his posture ramrod straight despite his evident age. His silver hair was neatly combed, and he wore a dark suit tailored with quiet precision. But it wasn't his suit that drew attention. It was the subtle, faded scar above his left eye and the way he held himself, a kind of disciplined stillness that only comes from years of high-stakes environments. He took 2 deliberate steps closer, closing the gap until he was near enough to address Amelia without needing to shout, yet ensuring his words remained audibly public. I said, "That's enough," he repeated, his eyes fixing on the insignia pinned to Amelia's collar, then traveling slowly up to meet hers. "You need to adjust your bearings, sailor." Amelia was momentarily stunned into silence. She was used to deference, not correction, especially not from a civilian, and certainly not in this tone. "Sir, I don't know who you are," Amelia began, her tone defensive, trying to assert the professional barrier her uniform provided. "This is a private family matter, and you need to mind your own business." The man smiled, but the expression held no warmth, only a chilling sense of absolute authority. "Oh, it stopped being a private matter the moment you decided to use the uniform of the United States Navy as a pulpit for public humiliation," he countered smoothly. "I know precisely who I am, Ensign, and I know precisely what that uniform is supposed to stand for." He paused, letting his gaze sweep the small, frozen audience, the 2 younger sailors, the airman's family, the baggage handlers who had paused their work. "I served 22 years. I retired as a Master Chief Petty Officer. My son is currently deployed with the 6th Fleet, and I have seen more honor and decency displayed by a newly enlisted seaman apprentice scrubbing a deck than I have just witnessed from you in the last 5 minutes," he stated, his voice ringing with quiet condemnation. The revelation of his rank and tenure instantly shifted the dynamics. The 2 enlisted men beside Amelia immediately stiffened to attention, recognition flashing in their eyes. A Master Chief Petty Officer, MCPO, is a figure of immense respect and authority, and in the unspoken hierarchy of the military airport, his word was gold. Amelia's face went pale. The color drained away, leaving the faint trace of sweat on her forehead. The veneer of her professional armor was cracking under the weight of legitimate, experienced critique. "My sister," the Master Chief continued, gesturing towards me, "came here to help you, to meet you, to offer you the love and support that, frankly, you don't deserve if this is how you treat people. And you chose to berate her for her clothing and her means." He leaned in slightly towards Amelia. "Let me tell you something, Ensign. The people who truly belong here are the families, the ones who worry, the ones who sacrifice at home, the ones who keep the lights on so you can do your job. The people in that uniform are supposed to serve and protect them, not look down on them. Honor, courage, commitment. You seem to have forgotten the honor part, and you certainly have forgotten commitment to your own kin." He then turned away from Amelia and addressed me, his tone immediately softening. "Son," he said, giving me a nod of respect, "you have nothing to be ashamed of. You did the right thing. Don't let her uniform intimidate you. She's wrong. Terribly wrong. The collective silence of the crowd was now a force field of agreement protecting me. The older woman who had shaken her head earlier now gave me a small, encouraging smile. The enlisted men who had witnessed the entire exchange quickly found reasons to look away from Amelia, clearly uncomfortable being associated with her behavior. The public intervention had done its job. The dignity Amelia sought to steal from me was instead stripped from her by a respected elder, right in front of her peers. Her authority, self-appointed and misused, was gone. #coldface the consequences and the humiliation. The Master Chief's words hung in the air, weighted with 22 years of service and the unassailable truth of his condemnation. Amelia, who just moments ago had stood tall, projecting an image of unyielding authority, was now visibly shrinking under the intensity of the public spotlight. The shift was instant and devastating. When she was criticizing me, she was commanding attention. Now that she was being called out by a senior veteran, a figure whose mere presence commanded respect, the attention felt like a physical burden. Her face, which had been pale with anger, was now flushed with a deep, furious scarlet. She tried to formulate a response to the Master Chief, but the words caught in her throat. The carefully constructed facade of her military persona was collapsing in real time. It's our family business, she stammered, her voice thin and unprofessional, a stark contrast to the booming confidence she had displayed moments before. The Master Chief didn't shout. He simply raised an eyebrow in cold dismissal. Your family business is now a lesson in conduct for every young sailor standing here, Ensign. And the lesson is clear. You don't disrespect the civilian base that supports your mission, especially not your own blood. You are wearing the uniform. That is a privilege, not a license to be cruel. The two younger sailors nearby shuffled their feet uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with Amelia. Their silent distancing was perhaps the most painful part of the confrontation for her. They didn't need to speak. Their body language declared that she was now an anomaly, an embarrassment to the code they all shared. She had alienated the very people she sought to impress. I watched numbly as the full weight of the public's disapproval settled upon her shoulders. The extended family of the airmen, who had witnessed the entire interaction, began packing up their luggage, casting quick, disdainful glances at Amelia as they moved away. Their silence was the most eloquent verdict. #the inversion of power. Amelia attempted to reclaim some control by focusing her anger back on me. Her eyes narrowed into slits of pure venom. You called him over, didn't you? She accused, her voice barely a whisper, thick with defeated rage. You love this. You love seeing me embarrassed. I shook my head slowly, feeling an unnerving sense of calm wash over me. I hadn't needed to call anyone over. Her own cruelty had done that. No, Amelia, I said, my voice quiet but carrying clearly, free from the tremor of fear it had held minutes ago. I didn't call him over. You did. You chose to start a fight in a room full of veterans and military families, wearing a uniform that is supposed to represent honor. You invited this verdict. I looked toward the Master Chief, who gave me a subtle nod, a quiet acknowledgement of shared understanding. Then, I turned my attention back to my sister, who stood marooned in the middle of the crowded terminal, clutching her oversized duffel bag, looking utterly alone despite the proximity of her peers. The crowd had sentenced her. There was no shouting, no physical altercation. Only the slow, agonizing realization that her attempt to elevate herself by tearing me down had backfired spectacularly. The authority of the uniform had been usurped by the greater authority of respect and moral conduct. She looked utterly defeated. The sharp, proud lines of her face had crumpled, replaced by the vulnerable, ugly reality of her humiliation. She was no longer the imposing military figure. She was just Amelia, stripped bare of her protection, caught being petty and cruel. She finally retrieved her duffel bag, her movements slow and jerky, a stark contrast to the disciplined snap of her earlier movements. She refused to look at the Master Chief or the young sailors. Her eyes were fixed on the polished floor, unable to meet the judgment of anyone around her. The confrontation was over, Not because I had won an argument, but because the collective ethics of the community had stepped in and rendered a verdict. She was forced to confront the consequence of her malice, not just from her younger brother, but from the institution she claimed defined her. The public shaming had successfully silenced her better than any words I could have used. #handshake, the conclusion of the drama. The silence that followed Amelia's humiliation was heavy, but it was no longer hostile. It was conclusive. The air had been cleared of the venom she had injected into the homecoming moment. Amelia snatched the handle of her duffel bag, her movements now jerky and uncontrolled. She refused to acknowledge the Master Chief, the observing sailors, or the civilian onlookers. Her eyes remained locked on the floor, a clear admission of defeat. She was a broken figure in an immaculate uniform, her pride shattered. "Let's go," she muttered, her voice barely audible, entirely devoid of its earlier command. She didn't look at me, didn't apologize, and didn't even indicate which way we should walk. She simply started moving toward the exit doors, forcing me to trail slightly behind her. I felt a complex rush of emotions: relief that the confrontation was over, sadness for the irreparable damage done to our relationship, and a strange, quiet dignity. I hadn't retaliated with cruelty. I had simply stood my ground, and the moral compass of the crowd had done the rest. #, the support of strangers. As I turned to follow her, a gentle touch landed on my arm. It was the older woman who had shaken her head in disapproval earlier, the one who had just said goodbye to her own service member. Her face, though still tired, held a genuine warmth. "Excuse me, honey," she whispered, leaning close so Amelia wouldn't hear. "I just wanted to tell you, you handled that beautifully. You are a good young man." She didn't ask for details. She didn't try to pry. She just offered validation. "Families are complicated," the woman continued, her eyes glistening. "But never let anyone, uniform or not, tell you that you don't belong. You were there for her. That's what matters." A second intervention came from the Master Chief. He caught my eye as I walked past him. He gave a sharp yet gentle salute. Not the formal military salute reserved for rank, but a salute of respect, acknowledging my endurance and my character. "Head high, son," he said, loud enough for me to hear clearly. Head high. This quiet, immediate support from strangers was profoundly moving. It was the antithesis of Amelia's cold rejection. They had seen my vulnerability and affirmed my worth, cementing the fact that I wasn't alone and that my sister's perspective was a toxic aberration, not a universal truth. #, the final walkout. I caught up to Amelia near the sliding glass doors. We walked out into the cold evening air without exchanging a single word. She was marching ahead, focused solely on escape. We reached my worn, old car, the one whose upkeep she had just scorned. I didn't reach for her duffel bag again. I simply opened the trunk and waited. She hesitated, then, with a defeated grunt, hoisted the heavy bag into the trunk herself. The physical effort seemed to drain the last vestiges of her pride. As I got into the driver's seat and she slid into the passenger seat, the enclosed space of the car magnified the silence between us. She was staring straight ahead, the uniform a costume of shame in the quiet privacy of the vehicle. I started the engine, pulling away from the curb and merging into the airport traffic. The military part of the journey was over. The family part was irrevocably damaged. The story concluded not with a dramatic reconciliation or a tearful apology. There would be none of that tonight, perhaps never. Instead, it ended with a profound sense of closure and an unexpected victory. Amelia had sought to diminish me publicly, but in doing so, she had been judged and found wanting by her own community. I drove out of the airport complex, carrying the silent, humiliated sister beside me, but I was no longer the one feeling small. I was the one driving forward, validated and seen, leaving the drama and the judgment behind us in the glowing lights of the terminal. I had lost a sister in the truest sense, but I had gained dignity.